Hello, everyone.
I'm Carl,
And I'm Em.
and welcome to our podcast discussing all of the latest books. This is season 2, episode 7, and today we are discussing Powerless by Lauren Roberts. As always, we'll save our ratings until the very end.
We promise to give you all of our honest opinions on all the characters, chapters, and scenarios. We don't mean any harm to any of the authors. This is solely our opinion, and as always, we promise to crawl them like we read them.
Period. So, some trigger warnings for this book and episode are references to domestic violence, violence against children, graphic blood and injury depiction, murder, torture, whipping, animal death, explosions, fire, weapons violence, genocide, death of parents, plague, alcohol consumption, suicide, and panic attacks.
Discrimination as well.
Yes. The main one is probably violence. So be sure to take care of yourselves before encountering this world, and spoilers will lie ahead.
Yeah, so if you don't want to hear how this book ends, please pause here, go read the book, and then come back to this episode. Are you ready to get started?
Let's get into it. So the blurb for this book is Peyton, thief, ordinary, survivor. I've never been looked at like it's a privilege to be in my presence, an honor to hold my gaze, a gift to get a glimpse of me. Not until I met him. Kai, prince, elite, enforcer. If I am to be her enemy, I want it to be because she loathes herself for wanting me. She is the very thing he has spent his whole life hunting. He is the very thing she has spent her whole life pretending to be. And fate ensured they would find each other.
Okay, so we begin in the kingdom where the plague has given some of the survivors supernatural powers, and society is now divided between magical elites and powerless ordinaries. And the elites believe that the ordinaries can contaminate the elites, so a lot of them are sentenced to die, and their families are sentenced to kind of exiled into a different city. In this, we meet Peyton and Kai, and Peyton learns to survive hunger and poverty after her father was murdered. Her best friend Adena is the only person who knows her secret. Peyton is an ordinary. His father, however, did train her to use her observation skills to pretend to be a powerful psychic. And Kai, the king's second-born son, who has the ability to use anyone's power as long as they're within his reach, while his older brother Kit is also set to become king. Kai has been trained to become the future enforcer, basically an assassin. When he runs into Peyton, who steals some of his gold, the two of them share an immediate and unexpected connection. Kai is attacked by a silencer, and Peyton intervenes and saves Kai's life. This leads her to be selected, along with Prince Kai and other elites, for the upcoming purging trials. Against her better judgment, she finds herself befriending Kit, a future king, and Kai, the future enforcer, trained to kill her. Peyton and Kai struggle to resist their undeniable attraction to each other. So, we start off with opening kind of where Peyton has been living with Adena, and they have this corner, I guess you can say, of the city that they call the fort, and it's basically just a pile of junk that they've made into kind of a home for themselves. It talks about the different supernatural abilities and things like that that some of the elites may have, and we also learn that the king has started purging ordinaries or killing them because he fears that they're going to intimidate killing them. And Peyton is one of those ordinaries, and Adena is apparently the only person that knows anything about that, which I do find really sweet that she did trust Adena, and getting Adena's story seemed pretty immediate that they did trust each other. It's a kind of brave of both of them to have, because Adena obviously can be killed or sentenced to exile for knowing about it, and then Peyton obviously would be killed. So that's a lot of trust to have in each other, to two people that really didn't know anything about each other.
Especially like when you're already on the street and already like starving and fighting to survive, you're obviously going to be even more hesitant to trust somebody that you don't know they also might be your competition for that place to sleep or like that food. So it was really
Mhm.
interesting to see how that sort of developed and like the difference in them too as well. The different personalities, the different characters, their different passions and stuff like that to see how that played out actually in the scenario of them surviving together.
Yeah. And so Peyton actually is the thief of the friendship. So she steals their different kind of fabrics, the food, all that kind of stuff. And then Adena makes clothing kind of in exchange for that. And then she also sells some of her clothing to get some extra money as well. And so it's very, in my opinion, unbalanced friendship because obviously clothing doesn't have the same equation. However, I don't believe Adena had anybody like Peyton had growing up that kind of helped her understand and kind of learn some different things to kind of help her survive in this kind of scenario. It's almost like her dad almost knew that that was what was going to end up happening. So he prepared Peyton pretty well for.
So I don't know, but do we get any more of A's background?
A little bit more. I'm trying to remember. I know we get a lot of the guy in Powerful's background. Yeah, there's the guy that Medina's like in lovey dovey with or whatever.
I wouldn't know she
Um,
was in love with anybody.
yeah, he's the one that kind of gets her killed. Yeah.
Oh, of course it was a man.
Yeah.
Does Peyton ever find
um,
out about him? I guess we don't know because it's the story's not over, so maybe.
I know that in Adena's story, they talk a little bit. She talks about how she kind of kept it from Peyton because she wanted her to focus on the games and not on Adena.
Lovely.
To my knowledge, no. But I have a feeling he'll end up coming around because he's one of the elites that gets chosen for the purgings. It's his cousin,
Oh, okay.
one of the ones that was picked up from the slums.
Oh, Ace?
Starts with an H. No, Hera? Is that her
Oh,
name?
yeah, that's Hera.
Husband's?
Yeah, she's the girl.
Yeah,
It's her
yeah.
cousin.
So that's his.
Oh, okay.
So we do learn a little bit about Peyton's relationship with her dad. And one of the quotes I wanted to read that she quotes her father with was, "Hide your feelings, hide your fear, and most importantly, hide behind your facade. No one can know you, Patty. Trust no one and nothing but your instincts." Which basically is relating to the fact that he trained her to kind of pick up on different things with people so she could pass off as a psychic, which honestly does her really well.
Mhm.
Yeah, she's really good at picking up on different things with people. Whenever she runs into Kai, that was really kind of put forth a little bit. But whenever Peyton does go out the next day to steal some food, she ends up bumping into what looks like a wealthier man, and she ends up finding a paper hidden in his pocket, which ends up discussing a secret meeting at her former home. And then she runs into an Imperial who becomes suspicious of her behavior, and she explains that she's a psychic, and he asks to prove herself, which honestly, girl power, loved that for her.
Mhm.
She basically called him out on cheating on his wife and that he was not willing to let her go and all that kind of stuff, which of course he then backhanded her because he did not like that.
Thing is, like,
How
when Kai learns about that, though, he very clearly, and it may be just in his thoughts, but in his thoughts or out loud, very clearly says, "And you just took the hit." Like, he knows she could have prevented it, avoided it, dodged it, whatever, and he's like, "But you took it?" And I love that, like, mentality of she's such a badass, you know?
well, I don't remember if she said it here or if she said it later on, but she said she took it because that way she was quickly out of his sight
Yeah,
and on her way back to what she was doing instead of like,
drawing attention to
still underneath
herself.
what. Yeah. So she talks about the two main keepsakes from her father is a silver wedding band that he had and his dagger, which does kind of play a part in the next book a little bit more. So that is something to kind of keep in mind. So Peyton goes out again later on and ends up discovering somebody else that looks a little wealthy. But she does talk about how he basically just looks like nobody could steal from him because she's got a coin purse pretty evident where somebody could easily steal it, which I'm sure other people probably knew who in the world he was, but she did not. So when she stumbles into him and tries to steal some of his coins, they kind of run across each other and have sort of like this cocky banter that goes on between the two of them, which they have really great banter chemistry the whole
I
book.
agree.
Like it was very, very good. And she basically calls him a cocky bastard and takes his coins, kind of distracts him, and runs away. And he doesn't notice this at first. And just that plays into a good part of how well she is at stealing, but then also B, how he was so distracted by her as well. So loved that. We get back into Kai's point of view, and he talks about how he ended up getting to the slums in the first place. He, as part of his enforcer duty, basically does the commands of the king's army, and he works as executioner. He is sent by his father to pick up an ordinary that they believe a family has been hiding in the slums. And so goes to this home. He notices that there's more food bowls than there should be. Kids are in the house. He ends up finding this little girl and starts reciting the law, which the father ends up attacking him, hoping to get his daughter and take off. He ends up subduing them and sending the Imperials to the edge of town. And then he ends up taking the girl to do his job. However, he ends up letting her go and leading her back to her family to also go away, which he does say, and this is a quote from the book: I slip out my dagger and cut the bindings from her wrist in one swift movement, meeting her gaze, and as I say, I don't kill children. Hypocrite. As if that's not exactly what I'm doing. In fact, I'm only prolonging the inevitable. But at least they will all be together in the end. A mockery of mercy that I only bestow upon children. So basically he's delaying the fact that he's killing them, whether that's because they end up evolving into something that he has to take care of as a threat to the kingdom, or whether that's just life will end up taking them away one way or another.
Well, and I think it's
um
partially too whether or not they're going to survive the desert actually crossing it and
yeah.
getting over to the city. Because, and we get that in book 2 more, but it talks about
Mhm.
the, um, like what the experience is crossing the desert. I will say, I kind of saw it coming that he didn't kill the kid. But I still was like, okay, brownie points.
I mean, the way he went about it too was very strategic, and obviously I think that was not the first time he did it, which very well could, because I mean, especially when we learn how terrible his father was to him to prepare him for this role.
Mhm.
His dad probably would have killed him finding out that he wasn't following through with what his duties are and stuff.
I
So,
agree.
but I also find it funny how so many people fear him so badly, but then he's really just this nice guy on the side too. So,
I
loved
don't know
that.
that I would say he's a nice guy on the side.
Well, I mean,
He's a
he did save a
torturer
bunch
and
of
a
children.
murderer, but he spares children.
Nice
I
guy.
will say
He could have killed the entire family too, and he chose not
I
to.
will say though, like the way he acts, and again, this is kind of starting into the next book, when he finds out that she is an ordinary, the way he kind of acts is kind of like, you don't really care if they're like we know that because you let these children live. So like you're really not that concerned. I
But I
wish
think that comes back to the
I
betrayal.
kind of wish it had been written more clear. Because like even at the very end, like I don't know, well, and we'll get into the next book more, but I just wish it had been I don't know. I feel like he has all of these thoughts to himself and acknowledges and knows he has all these feelings and is like super into it and like is very, quite frankly, like honest with himself about how much he loves her and is into her. And then we get to the end and it's like, oh, she's an ordinary. That doesn't matter. You're a liar.
But I think it comes down to the betrayal at the end. I don't think it's about the fact that she's an ordinary.
I will say though, when when the king carves the O in her chest, rage, dude. Pure rage. And if she doesn't like rip her shirt down and be like, this is what, and like to Kai, this is what your dad did to me, or this is what your dad thought of, or whatever at some point in the next book, I'm going to scream.
And then he does that whole "who did this to you"
It
moment.
better be. Because he's already, which again, this is the next book, so this part I do have to cut out, but he's already talked about her scar in the next book. And which I guess I don't have to cut it out because it's not like it's really that much of a spoiler. He does the scar in this book. He talks about how he can see the scar and he knows where she got it, but he doesn't want to accept it or whatever. But like the O is so much more serious, obviously.
Yeah.
So if I don't get that scene in the next book, I'm done. I'm not reading Fearless.
There's another half book too.
Well, did you see what I sent you though for Fearless tonight?
I don't, I don't think so.
She posted a compilation of herself writing and talking or whatever, and she snuck in this little script, and it says, "I would spend the rest of my days making her flowered crowns if she wanted to be a queen. My queen, not Kit's, not Ilya's, mine." Do you know what's at the top of the next book?
I think I've seen it, but I can't remember what it said.
It says betrothed, betrayed, destined to be for each other, or something like that. But you know what that means? That
They got married.
her and Kit get betrothed in book 2. That's what that means. The love triangle doesn't end.
I ain't mad at that.
I am. He's a badass, and we underestimate him.
Oh, 100%.
But his pure rage at the end of this book also pisses me off. Like, your dad's a coward. And I actually liked him throughout the rest of the book.
I think he was more mad at the betrayal than he was anything.
Kai literally says he was covered in blood and like just burning people alive. And he's like, I've never seen my brother look that way. But that's because he was the one that told her about the tunnels. That's why he's pissed. Mm-hmm. But you know what? Too bad. Use your brain. He made me mad though when she was like, "Don't you think for yourself?" He was like, "That's what the king has told me." And she was like, "You have a brain though." Made me very mad. We'll see how the rest of the series goes. So.
Well, and he talks about how he's just like struck by her beauty and wit too whenever he runs across her. And he like talks about how he can't sense her power, but he lets her go, which I do find instantly interesting because it's just like he's either so blinded by her or he's kind of doing the same thing he was doing with the kids.
I think he believed her when she said that she was a psychic and she could protect her mind from him. I don't know why he believed that because that's dumb. Yeah. But I think he just wanted to believe it. I think he was like, she's hot and I'm into it and whatever.
I do think it was wishful thinking for sure.
Absolutely.
Blind ignorance is the right word.
He's never met a mundane that he couldn't sense. So why all of a sudden would he not be able to sense her?
Yeah. Well, and so he ends up running across a group of elites that try to rob him. Whenever he refuses to hand over his money because Peyton has stolen it, he starts fighting them off using their powers against themselves, which he's a wielder, so he basically could take their power and use it as his own. He has this moment where all of a sudden a silencer comes upon him, which is apparently a kind of elite that can suppress people's abilities. He's in extreme pain, his power is being silenced, and Peyton ends up coming across the fight and attacking the silencer and the other guys. Once she realizes who she just saved, she runs away or tries to. Kai catches her and starts questioning about her powers. She puts on her facade and starts talking about her psychic powers, and then she goes through a demonstration. And she talks about how he had come across that family and that he went to the desert and then he banished the family to the Scorches and hid it all because he was guilty, which I think it shocked him. So he let her go because it just like shocked him that she knew all that pieces of information. But again, blind ignorance. Well,
wholeheartedly agree. And I got to be honest, I was a little bit confused about the silencers because it said they just like smother your power. Like, they negate it. Like, it just doesn't work. You can't use it. I don't understand why it was painful for Kai, who doesn't actually... I mean, his power is taking other people's powers. So if he's not using someone else's power, then what are you smothering? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I kind of thought the painful side of it did make a whole lot of sense to me for the silencers.
Well, to me, how do I describe this? It made sense because in my mind, I was thinking like, I know this sounds really dumb,
No, it's
but
fine. Go ahead.
on the Magic School Bus, whenever the
Wait, okay,
episode
I did not know
where
that's where we were going. The magic school bus.
I know that's what I'm saying. That's why
Okay.
it sounds dumb, but just follow
All
with
right.
me. So, in the episode where she's going through the body and the bloodstream and all that stuff, and the school bus goes, and you've got those floating like red blood cells or whatever going around. So, my thought is basically the red blood cells have like merging of the power part and then like the regular blood, and it's almost like ripping one away from the other, kind of like a Venom situation where he can't be himself on his own, but with somebody else he can be. You get what I'm saying?
Ooh, I don't know how you thought of that.
I don't know. That's just what.
I don't know how your brain said, this is what it looks like to me. Like, what? First of all, half the time you don't even read like the details. So I'm even surprised you even had that thought to start with, much less that is where we went.
I don't know why. It was just like, and what's bad is that the Magic School Bus thing didn't even go anything into the details, but that's just what my brain thought
That's
of.
funny. Okay. All right. Well, if that's what you thought of, that's valid. My brain didn't go there. But to each their own.
Well, hopefully that helps clarify what your thoughts were.
Sure.
So she ends up coming out, Peyton, the next day and finds out that like everybody's eyes are on her. What she ends up finding out that she was one of the people that the slums people had voted to participate to represent them in the purging trials, which is kind of dumb because they have to vote. Because to me, like, obviously they're not getting any kind of reward from them winning. So, but like, to me, you would take your best of your best if like you were getting some kind of reward, like maybe like a district thing, kind of like
Hunger
how it
Games.
was in the Hunger Games, where like maybe the district won like a prize or like got a bunch of food or something like that.
When I was telling you like
But
how I kept seeing things that reflected in other books, that was one of them.
yeah, the Hunger Games is like thoroughly throughout this entire thing
Yeah.
was very
Yeah.
similar, especially even like the love triangle situation. It was very much like that because they kept talking about how Kai was like kind of similar to Peyton in a lot of ways, which would be the same with PETA.
One's not in the trial.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then like they talk about Kit, how he's like almost like holier than thou, and that was kind of the same as what's that guy's name? The Liam Hemsworth paid.
Gale.
Yeah.
Some white boy name.
So, but anyways, it just doesn't make sense to me why they would choose one of their strongest ones to participate if they weren't getting any kind of reward. Maybe in hopes that if they won, then they would reap the benefits. I don't really know what the train of thought is with it. That was kind of the confusing part of it. But they said it was almost advertised as like an honor for your family, which of course everybody knew that was a lie. But
Yeah.
you know, whatever they got to do to sell it.
I don't know why they would. She saved the prince, so you vote her and call her your silver savior, and then vote her to go die in the trials.
Yeah.
Doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. The only thing that makes sense is that they were hoping they reap the benefits of maybe her possibly winning.
Which was never going to happen. Y'all didn't even know that girl existed.
Either that or they were mad at her for saving Kai, and so they put her in there to die because they were like, man, you're stupid for saving the king's son.
I guess. I don't know. Are you though? Wouldn't everybody in that area have felt the wrath of the king if the king had found out they all stood back and watched?
Probably. But they don't think that far.
Probably not.
Well, so Kai has been, in the meantime, torturing the silencer that he captured and hopes to figure out what he's doing because apparently the Fatals, as some of the higher elite powers were called, are the most dangerous. They have been ordered to be killed, and apparently some of them have gotten away and decided to join the resistance to help. So Kai basically reports back to Kit and his father that the king kind of becomes a little irate about not learning anything from him.
Did it not like tickle your brain? Have like a little hello in the background when I don't know why I just described it that way. When she found that note though that was at her dad's house, did your brain not go, he was a part of the resistance?
I mean, that was pretty much the rational kind of connection of dots, but
Why did it take her so long to realize that?
I had justified a lot of her actions because she was starving. So, like, I know that sounds really bad, but my
I
justification was
justified
basically
a lot of her actions because she was starving.
I mean, when you're starving, everything else goes out of your brain and you don't have the willpower to string things together.
But then she was fed at the castle and she was still acting dumb.
Well, at that point, I think she was just worrying about surviving and her love
I
triangles.
was worried about her love triangle a little bit more.
Well,
I don't know. I will say I like Lenny, her guard.
yeah, he's nice.
He reminds me of Lucian from Alcatraz.
I can get that relation. Yeah,
I don't know if he's dead or not though.
So Kit, while him and Kai are training, Kit's noticing that his brother Kai is a little distracted, and he starts teasing him about the girl who saved his life in the slums. And they are end up joined by Jax, which is a 15-year-old boy that they had kind of adopted as their brother, who has the ability to teleport himself over short distances, or as they refer to him as a blink, I believe. And then in the training ring, they also have Blair, who is practicing with Sadie, and Blair is a telekinetic,
Yeah.
and then Sadie is a girl who can clone herself. And once they join the boys, they start talking about who all was selected for the trials, and they end up finding out that Jax was selected, which kind of worries them a little bit. But also Kai, Sadie, and Blair are also selected. And Kai also learns that Payton, who he thought he would never see again, is also part of the trials, which, I mean,
Obviously.
that was obvious that was going to happen.
Duh. I
So,
hate Blair. If she doesn't die
yeah,
in book 2, I'm burning it.
she was kind of my Jack in this book.
She is.
But Ace also became
He's
Jack as
weak.
well.
Violet called him out in like 5 seconds on his illusions. The difference in his illusions and like Sadie's are that like his were just air. Like you could
Yeah,
blow him away.
Sadie. Yeah, Sadie's could actually be like hard
They
people.
fought her. Yeah, like she was like legit
Yeah,
cloned.
which would be kind of a cool power to have.
No. I don't need
I need
multiple
that right
me's.
now. I need that right now.
That means somebody else needs to hire somebody.
So, a friendly looking Imperial approaches Payton downtown and informs her that she is expected at the castle. And although the trials start in 2 weeks, all the contestants are basically taken to the palace and kept there for training and things like that. Um, After she says goodbye to Adena, she's led back to a coach in which she ends up meeting the other two contestants, Ace and Hera. And Peyton decides that she's going to be brave and try to survive the trials without being discovered as an ordinary. Which honestly, if you know you're going to die, what does it matter if they know you're an ordinary or not to me? But,
Matter of fact, y'all need to know.
I think that, to be honest, I know this sounds really bad, but I think that would have been a more interesting way to get rid of the ordinaries than killing your own people. I mean,
Why would you put your elite warriors in the trials to kill each other? How
yeah.
is that a good strategy to make a strong kingdom?
Like, the only one that makes sense to me is Kai, because they're putting him in there to, like, prove his worthiness as the
He
future
was showing
enforcer or
off.
whatever. But,
Yeah,
yeah.
1,000%. But Sadie, Blair,
Yeah.
Braxton, like, why would you put any of them in there? Draft them hoes to the military.
And most of them were, like, the military families, like,
Yeah.
kids, too. Because Andy, I think, is his
Mhm.
cousin, Kai and Kit's cousin. And then Sadie and Blair, I think they talk about being, like, the second or third in command's kids or something like
Yes.
that.
Yeah. It makes no sense why you would do that.
Which I think what they're trying to justify is it's not really a trial to, like, kill people. It's just get their armband. But that's what's going to happen when you get a bunch of basically teenagers hyped up on hormones.
Well, I mean, that's probably not what happens when you get a bunch of teenagers hyped up on hormones. But what happens when you put bloodthirsty individuals in a battle against each other is violence.
Well, they can't control their emotions.
Who can't?
Teenagers. Somebody makes them mad, they want to then go and attack other people.
Did you attack people when you got pissed off as a teenager?
I
No,
wish.
because you had self control.
Well, I don't think you would classify me the same as other teenagers whenever I was a
Me
teenager.
neither. But that's not the point. The point is, it's possible to control yourself. Whether you do or not is a different discussion.
I do agree, but however, Peyton does acknowledge that, like, whenever they get confined to their rooms when they get back to the castle, like, she's like extremely irrationally angry that he's basically doing like a mind, like the king's trying to do like mind games on them.
That didn't make sense to me, though. You've been living on the street, hungry, cold, dirty, and you don't want to chill in that jacuzzi for 2 days? You lying.
But I mean, if you're thinking about like basically what you could be doing instead of like preparing yourself basically to die for 2 days.
She could have been working out in that bedroom.
Yeah,
She could have been training.
she could have been.
She could have been. It was 2 days. Catch up on sleep. I know you're not sleeping that well on the streets.
Well, she talked about how she couldn't sleep very well because of the whole situation.
You know they say that though. Like the military say it too. Like they sleep on cots or whatever over there for so long, they get back in like a comfortable bed is not actually comfortable because it's not what they're used
Yeah.
to. But then sleep on the floor. Sleep on the floor for 24 hours and get caught up. I mean, quit lying.
I would definitely have enjoyed the bed.
Me too. And in the bathtub. Quit playing with me. You wouldn't be able to get me to leave.
The thing that threw me was they kind of imply that she didn't take a bath until like after Lenny was like, "Hey, get cleaned up for dinner," and I'm like, "You've sat in that room smelling the same as what you did when you got off the streets for 2 days.
You dirtied up those bed linens. Take
Mm-hmm.
a shower. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No. I'm sorry, girl, but you're lying. You need to,
Well,
like,
and so
actually clean your
Lenny,
nails for the first time in your life. You know what I'm saying? Clip your toenails. Fix yourself. Cut your hair a little bit. I don't know. Something like there's so many things you could do in that room. So many.
well, they don't really emphasize what she actually did waiting for 2 days besides just growingly become more and more angry.
She could have been working out. I've read books where they work out in their room. Heck, it said Kai practices his sword in his room. She could be doing sit-ups. Get you some abs. I don't know.
Well, so she meets Lenny, who is her imperial assigned to kind of guiding her around the castle. And then she also meets Kit. So she opens up the door to go yell at Lenny. And then Kit introduces himself and kind of has this little playful banter with her as well. And then he comes and leads her to the throne room where they're going to have dinner. And she sits with all the other contestants. So there's Ace, Hera, Andy, Braxton, Sadie, Blair. And then they also have where Kit and his mother and father join them as well. So the king basically states, hey, you should be using your upcoming weeks to practice your fighting. The queen also adds that they should be working on their dancing skills. As they're sitting at the table, the food obviously gets piled on and everything, and Kai notices that Peyton seems really angry at the display of wealth to eat, and he kind of does this little cocky thing where he starts filling up her plate, which obviously annoys her tenfold. So,
Can I add though? I feel like that was a little early on.
what do you mean?
The enforcer is serving someone. I feel like that should have been at a later dinner. It
But
feels too intimate
however,
for me for this point in their relationship.
I do agree. I think though that that was kind of supposed to elaborate on like his being enamored with her, but I also think he was just doing it to annoy her.
Yeah, but like his dad sitting right there, the king watching. I feel like the king would have been pissed.
Oh, 100%. I feel like he would have said something in that moment if it was like a real life
Yeah.
like situation. Because basically it displayed a little bit of a weakness, I guess you can say.
Absolutely, I mean, I don't think it should be seen as a weakness, but it absolutely, as the enforcer, you can't serve some poor girl that just got sat at our table for the first time. Like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
I don't know. That was weird.
Well, and so the king does pick up a conversation with Peyton and ask her about her power. She kind of mentions, "Oh, I'm just a psychic," and he also mentions knowing about her father, which Peyton kind of has a little bit of an emotional reaction with it, but just kind of lets it go. And they end up having where Kai walks her back to her room as it's like right across the way from his. And he basically states that he's on equal footing with the other contestants in the trials. And obviously she says, like, no, you're not, because your social status makes you different. But he kind of provokes her into a fight, and Peyton like draws a knife and has like this really like kind of, how to describe it, like a little knifey, like sexual moment, I guess you could
Some
say.
sexual.
Yeah, but with some knife play.
It is kind of a little bit like knife play, but it's also like you threaten me, but it turns me on instead of scares me vibe.
Yeah, yeah. And so they end up having like this moment, and the description of the scene was, we watched each other for a long moment. Her gaze is unwavering, reminding me of the still ocean, the calm before the storm. And she states, mark my word, Prince, I will be your undoing. And I lean in, ignoring the knife against my throat as I murmur, oh, darling, I look forward to it.
I'm
And
gonna
that's
say this, and this is gonna sound really, really harsh. And I don't intend for it to be that harsh, but it maybe is. If this book did not have the banter that it has, I don't think I would have enjoyed it as much.
agreed.
Like, it was
I think the banter is the plot.
the banter is the entire book, to be quite frank. There were some good bones to this story, and I liked the characters. I just didn't think the fantasy and the action side of things was as well developed as it could have been.
So to me, the bones were from other stories to me.
I agree.
Like
Yep. We talked about this.
yeah, we talked about it a little bit, but like the Hunger Games hugely, I think, influenced this book. And there's several other books that, I mean, very blatantly you can tell had it. They have a comment at some point, and I don't even know if I quoted it, but it was almost like the same thing that Fourth Wing had of, oh, you're a violent little thing, aren't you?
Mhm.
It was something similar to that. There was several influences, which, I mean, great. Those were obviously successful books and things, but at the same time, it doesn't really seem original.
No, I agree, and we talked about this, and I think that's sort of what kinda messed it up for me in that aspect, because every little piece of the plot had already been done by someone else, and it had been done well. Hunger
Yeah.
Games, I mean, it's just good. And then I told you the trials kinda reminded me a little bit of ACOTAR, but it also kind of reminded me of Throne of Glass, which you haven't read Throne of Glass, so you can't see that yet. But there are several themes throughout that I was like, that's kind of similar to my girl. And I really loved Throne of Glass. So for me, Throne of Glass was just so good that like seeing it repeated, even if it's not identical but similar enough and it wasn't done as well, kind of ruined it for me because I knew how good it
Yeah.
could be, kind of thing. So I totally agree that it was, and really, even the banter is kind of the same thing. But that's just always so fun that it's easier to overlook that than it is like the plot. But I wholeheartedly agree. I don't think it was as well developed as it should have been if we were going to reuse ideas from other people. And I'm not even saying that she intentionally did that because I know, like, when you read stuff and you take it in, you can subconsciously use that without realizing that you're doing it. So I'm not saying it was intentional, but it almost felt like we grabbed this from here and we grabbed that from this and that and this and there and then we mix that and then this is sort of the same but we made them a different color or whatever it is, but it just didn't hit the same way. Like without the banter, I don't think I probably would have, if we weren't reading for this podcast and it didn't have the banter that it had, I probably wouldn't have finished it. I'm just going to be honest.
Yeah, so I read the first time back in like April, and I was telling Carly this before we started recording that I honestly think that me reading it then, I had just got back into reading like January ish. So to me, it was like kicks and giggles. Loved this book the first time I read it. The second time, I was just kind of like, oh, yeah. Because at that time, I had not read ACOTAR. There was a lot of other books that I had not read that was like fantasy wise. And like, I know I bashed on ACOTAR, but honestly, like looking back, I do think ACOTAR was better. I still do like this book because I do love the banter. I love Kai. Like, it's really good, but I do think that it's not as great as like the first time I read it for sure. And I don't know if I would read it now knowing what I know for the first time. I would have the same reaction as what I did before, but reading it the second time for sure I did not have the same reaction as what I did the first time.
No, I wholeheartedly agree. And like I do like Kai and I like Kit and I like Peyton. My problem is like one of the biggest things for me when I'm reading a fantasy book or a romantasy is like that strong female character. And like Peyton does have aspects of that. But like anytime we get into a scene that's supposed to be like a strong empowerment, like Peyton's gonna kick some ass, Kai ends up saving her.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's not what we're doing here. She's not a damsel. That's supposed to be the entire point of the book. And yet she is over and over and over again. And so it kind of made me like her less, which is not really fair to the character, but still. But I don't know. I hate to say that because there was such hype around this book. And I was so excited to like think it was going to be like another next level. And you haven't read this one either, but From Blood and Ash is also a big romantasy, and it is so good and such a strong female character. And there's some similarities there too. So I don't know. Unfortunately, I think I'm a little let down.
Well, and I do have to say that based on what you just said, I do think that because the title is Powerless, like they talk about like how she's just ordinary and like almost to the point where she is kind of the weaker one constantly. So I think that was kind of the play. And I'm hoping that when we get Fearless, it'll kind of talk about how she was more like carefree. Because in Reckless, you start kind of uncovering that a little bit more, where she's more like independent, headstrong, like she obviously takes on Kai, things like that. So I do think that there's a little bit more
That's because in
of
Reckless,
that.
though, it's she's with other ordinaries. That's why she kind of stands out a little bit when you first start reading it. I feel like I haven't finished it though, so I don't know for sure about the end of it. But I'm like chapter 19, and it's because she's around other ordinaries that she seems not ordinary.
Well,
But I thought the whole point
true.
was like they thought she was powerless, but she's not. Like that's kind of where, like Violet, they think she's weak, and maybe she's not physically strong like Violet wasn't at the beginning, but she used her wit and poisoned people, or you know what I mean, like something. And we do see. I don't dislike Peyton, and like I said, I think there's some good bones, but I just don't think we fully developed that idea of her because, like, we talk about like her little dagger that she carries all the time, except she's actually scared to kill people. Okay, what? Then we talk about how she's so smart and like her dad was a healer and she knows all these things. So she makes like this cute little salve for him while they're out in the woods. Okay, that's cute. Then the next instant, this girl's about to kill her and she's just going to surrender to death instead of killing her. And then she has a panic attack and he has to bury the body and then hold her while she sleeps. I get the panic attack. I get not wanting to kill people. Like, I'm not saying she has to be bloodthirsty, but like, I feel like there's this level of you do what you have to do to survive. And that comes from partially, I think, the way she was raised, but also she grew up on the streets. So her being scared to hurt somebody just doesn't make sense to me. I didn't like it.
I
I wanted
understand.
her to be bloodthirsty. I wanted him to be like, whoa. But like for a purpose, not just because. Does that make sense?
I think it was trying to show how mundane though she was that like in those moments of like weakness almost, it was like showing that she isn't like the same as everybody else and like she was trying to go up against something big and bad almost, but like I get what you're saying
But she
though.
was supposed to do that and come out triumphant, and she only did that because Kai saved her. So if like good is going to win, then let good win and tell Kai to sit down. You know what I'm saying?
But I think that was also his like savior complex that he had though as well.
I think he only had a savior complex because she actually needed saving. Because in the moments when she doesn't need saving, he's able to focus on his own. Like at the very end of the first trial, he's able to focus on the fact that Ace is trying to fight him and that he hurt Jax, and he's not even thinking about her. I don't know. I just thought I liked it. I'm hoping it redeems itself as we go forward. You know, sometimes the first book is world building. We're just setting the scene. So I'm hoping that it gets better as it goes forward and that will make it better. But right now I'm a little concerned.
So they are back at the palace and they are training. And as Peyton is practicing throwing knives, Kai interrupts her by throwing one onto her target. And Peyton and him kind of have this little bit of like a banter moment where Blair kind of gets jealous that Kai focus on Peyton. So she throws a dagger and it nicks her in the ear. And Kai has a sweet moment where he ends up braiding Peyton's hair so that way she doesn't get blood on her hair, which is so
That was
sweet.
cute.
But so as they're getting ready for the upcoming interviews, Peyton kind of gets a little nervous that she's going to have to demonstrate her power, but Kit kind of talks to her, calms her down, and Peyton is a little kind of off put by Kit, but it's just because of like her cautiousness. And she ends up going into the arena and she does end up having to describe her talents, and like the interviewer kind of picks random people out of the crowd, which we end up finding out that Jax is able to teleport any place in his field of vision. Broughton is a brawny, which he has supernatural strength. Ace is an illusionist that he can conjure up mirages in front of everyone. Sadie can clone herself, which creates copies of herself that walk around the stands in the arena. And Blair is a telekinetic, which makes the interviewer levitate off the ground. Hera is a veil, so she can vanish and turn people invisible as well. Andy, which is Kai and Kit's cousin, can turn into different animals, but she has a different colored coat, basically, which is the same color as her hair. And then Kai demonstrates that he can use each of the contestants' abilities as well. So Peyton gets on the stage and kind of has this moment where she's talking and she decides to just be honest, which makes the crowd instantly love her. It does kind of remind me of a little bit of like a Hunger Games kind of thing where they have that interview at the beginning before the whole shebang takes off.
Yeah.
She starts kind of making fun of Kai a little bit. She talks about being a sidekick, her life in the slums. She's honest about the poverty and challenges that she faces. When she asks what she's expected from the game, she just honestly says survival. She does end up kind of deducting about different people from the crowd. She does end up saying at some point, this is all a game to them. But if I want to stay alive, I have to play my part. I have to play them. Being a pawn in their game is the price I have to pay to survive. Make them believe I like this, and in turn, they will like me. So I straighten up, holding my head a little higher as I smile a little brighter. I am no one's pawn. She's decided to kind of play their own game back at them while being true to herself as well. I really appreciate that about her because all of the rest of them are kind of just like, yeah, this is like the greatest thing I've ever been allowed to do. I'm so grateful for this opportunity. And then she's like, no, this sucks. I'm just trying to like survive till tomorrow. Like,
Yeah, I was gonna say I love that what her answer was survive, and everybody else was like bring honor to my kingdom, my family, and myself, and she was like, "Yo, I'm just trying to survive this." Like, what you mean? Yeah, I liked that.
I would like to go home now, but since I can't, this is what
Yeah,
I
y'all
do.
voted me here. Like, screw y'all.
Well, and so as this is all happening, we end up finding out that Kai has continued to try to torture the silencer, which he's only received his name from him. And they end up going back to dinner, and the queen ends up reminding them that they have an upcoming ball. And so Kai wants to ask Peyton, but decides that she'll likely refuse him as a partner. So he just kind of ignores that. And so as they go back to training, Peyton is throwing punches, and Kai notices that her form is lacking. So he has this little banter moment again with her and talks about how she just relies on her rage and frustration and that she needs to kind of better herself of how she's throwing her punches. And when he asks her if she can demonstrate her punching skills, Peyton tries to punch him. And they have this little sparring match. And while they fight, Kai has like this flirtation with her, and she starts responding, and she has like really heavy sarcasm. And they end up just kind of drawing. And she gives this almost like last warning to the prince, and she throws a knife at him before leaving. But it was just such a good moment. I think that's honestly one of my favorite scenes between the two of them.
Yeah, it is a good one.
So Kit ends up walking her back to her room that night after dinner, and he talks about how he's, glad she was honest during her interviews, and then he ends up asking her to be his partner in the ball, in which she accepts. She does end up saying, "A smile lifts my lips at the image of a former slummer and a future ruler hand in hand, the perfect picture of polar opposites, the most powerful man paired with the most powerless woman." Which, like you said, I do think is a little bit of foreshadowing. I have not finished Reckless, so I cannot say that that is the case of what you believe ends up happening there, but I do think that that's some kind of foreshadowing in some way.
No. What
Maybe.
if she doesn't end up with Kai? What are we gonna do?
I don't know in a love story I've ever read the dual perspectives where it doesn't in some
We
way.
get Kit's perspective in Reckless.
True.
Why can't she just have both? Yeah,
No.
she can have the king and the enforcer. She'd be untouchable.
I mean, she would, but I just think that because of who they are, they would get too jealous and it would end up being like a bloodbath between the king and the enforcer.
They can fight it out and then they can heal themselves and get over it. It might be hot to watch.
True. So then what?
Why did it get so quiet though? And so Peyton then.
I was maybe or maybe not imagining them two fighting it out, but
Oh, that's funny.
But anyway, so Peyton requests Adena's skills as a seamstress to sew her some gowns, and Adena basically gets to come to live at the palace and be fed and paid for her duration during the trials, which great way for Adena to kind of make an extra buck
Murdered.
and well, that too. Which honestly though, I don't know. I'm still kind of confused as to how that was uncovered, but that's for the next bonus
Yeah.
episode. So Kai comes and knocks on Peyton's door that night and offers to teach her how to dance. And she refuses at first, but then ends up deciding to, take him up on that. He does take her to his actual room, which is very like an intimate moment that she gets to see behind the curtain, I guess you can say. Peyton ends up being reunited with Adina the next day and ends up going into the ball and wearing a silver gown, which I guess all the other people that are there are wearing green gowns. So she stands out, but it's definitely a play on her Silver Savory nickname. Her and Blair kind of get into it a little bit, and Kai ends up breaking up the fight, and he kind of acknowledges in that same moment that his feelings for Peyton was going to complicate his role in the trials. He starts to flirt with her, but Peyton is kind of distracted while they're dancing from the boy who she had stolen the secret message from the lute. And as she's kind of dwelling on this, the event is suddenly interrupted by an attack on the resistance. And basically, Kai drags her to a safe room along with his family and leaves her there and then returns to the fight, which Kit's mad about. He's not happy with it, but he does eventually accept that he, obviously is the future king. And Peyton decides to approach Kit and learn a little bit more about what's going on, which to me, I just imagine it like a smaller room. So I'm not quite sure how that much information was able to be told without the king and queen kind of having a problem with
I
that.
agree. It wasn't that
But
small of a room. It like there's only so much distance you can put between. To,
well, and the king kind of consistently tells her to like stay away from Kai and stay away from Kit and stuff.
and
So
it says
like
like
I don't
he went over
understand.
to his dad and then would come back to her and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know, weird. But after they get out, they end up finding Kai injured, and he does use a healer's powers to heal himself, and he makes a promise to Peyton to stay alive in the trials.
Have you joined our Fable book club? Fable is an upgraded app to keep up with your library, connect with friends, track your books you've read, and so much more. Did we also mention half-star ratings? That definitely sold us. Check the link in our description to join our book club now.
So Part two is the first trial where the contestants are left to survive in a forest and they have to fight one another to retrieve the most armbands, which the description of that just seems kind of youth reading. But so Kai ends up finding Peyton injured, and she and the prince form an alliance and eventually make it through the trial. Afterwards, Peyton secretly returns to the loot to find members of the resistance, who she promises to help sneak into the arena during the final trial. They enlist her to find the passage so they could do so, and she tricks Kit into revealing one. They end up waking up and they're in a forest called the Whispers, which is apparently an impenetrable forest. They are being followed around by what they call the sights, which are elites with the ability to record and project what they see, which that sounds like something from another movie as well. I couldn't think of what it is, but it sounded very familiar. But Kai ends up finding a message in his pocket which explains the rules of the task, which states the contestants are all wearing an armband and have a week to collect as many of them as possible to win the trial. The prince collects a sword and some canteens and things, and he's interrupted by Braxton, who's trying to ambush him. They fight, and each one of them gets burned by Kai's fire. The prince does end up grabbing Braxton's armband before letting him run away. We get back into Peyton's perspective where she wakes up and looking for water, which she ends up coming across a pool which has a floating dead body that looks like Kit's body, but we end up finding out that after she jumps into the water, it all disappears, and it's actually Ace projecting an illusion, which also sounded like another book or movie as well. I know this sounds really bad, but it's just like a lot of this seemed very familiar to me, and I don't know if it's just because I read it before and now that I'm like analyzing it, it's like coming back to me in the same aspect, or if I've actually read something prior. But
Hunger Games has both fire and hallucinations
okay,
in the
then yeah,
woods.
okay, then
Because
yeah.
the hallucinations are when they get stung by that bee, and then the fire,
Oh
remember, it's like
yeah,
they're sleeping and the fire is set and they have to run from it or whatever.
oh yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah,
they're
yeah.
both in there. And they're both, like, in this sequence, I think. So, it's not identical. Like, it's not word for word, but it's pretty similar. The gist is there. I
Yeah.
will say, though, him holding that boy over the fire and then he let that boy go. I don't. That didn't make no sense to me.
There was a lot of it that didn't, but I kind of was just under the impression that because it was a YA, they were trying to keep it a little clean. But then, like, we get to
He
the
held
point
him
where, like,
over the fire.
people-
He didn't like accidentally tumble into the fire. He held him over the fire.
I said a little clean. I didn't mean fully clean.
All I knew is I kept texting Emily and I was like, if they don't kiss, if they don't kiss, if they don't kiss, something, give me something.
To be honest, the first time I read it, that was why I kept reading. Was like, I want the first kiss to happen. So as she's trying to get away from Ace, she ends up shooting him in his leg with an arrow, and then he also hits her with his spear and wounds her gut. So as she's searching for water, she ends up coming across Kai, and she threatens him with this bow and tries to act like big macho, and she ends up fainting in front of him.
Again,
Kai saves her. Well, and Kai finds a box that ends up having the healing salve.
a box that has a
Her,
healing salve.
yeah,
Hunger Games.
yeah. Whenever she finds PETA.
And the contestants can send them things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the next morning, after she's healed, she wakes up to find out that Kai is still there and he has not taken her armband. But he starts evading her questions about his true feelings and just kind of proposes an alliance instead. They start having like the chit chats about his life and her life, and he talks about his upbringing and how terrible his dad was, and that basically the trials were merely a game for Kai to prove himself to the king. And as they're having this discussion, they're suddenly surrounded by a group of wolves, which they have to fight off. And Kai is injured, and Peyton ends up healing him, which it was very random.
Wolves. A group of wolves.
Yeah. So randomly, the prince asks her to dance with him in the middle of the forest. It was a weird thing, but they end up getting interrupted by Sadie, and Sadie tries to get their armbands by cloning herself. She threatens Peyton's life, battle ensues. Kai ends up fighting by multiplying into different versions of himself. Peyton ends up identifying which one was the real Sadie and tries to take her on, but they end up overpowering her. As Peyton's about to die, Kai ends up killing Sadie. Peyton starts having a full blown panic attack as she's watching Sadie die. Kai comforts her and decides to take Sadie's body, and he ends up burying her with flowers on the grave. Basically, to make her feel better, in my opinion, the prince ends up letting her have Braxton's armband, and he keeps Sadie's.
No, she picks it from
And
his pocket.
well, she does, but I think he just like to make her feel better. He's like, "Well, I'll keep Sadie's since I killed her, and you just take Braxton's."
Yeah.
Because obviously, I think if he would have handed her Sadie's armband, it probably would have ended up in a hysterical fit.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know why. She was about to kill you. This is a battle. This is life or death, baby. She didn't have to kill you. She could have just cut it from your arm. She was choosing to kill you.
true.
She gotta die. I don't know.
Well, so on the last day of the trials, they receive a message calling the contestants to the edge of the forest, which basically the king's just trying to bait them all to fight one another, which again sounds very Hunger
It
Games.
is.
Um, so they meet up with Jax and Andy and they kind of recount their adventures and everything. And as they get to this clearing, there's a fight that begins whenever Blair, Braxton, and Hera show up. Kai ends up spotting Ace and he decides to fight the illusionist because of what he did to Peyton. And Ace ends up conjuring up a mirage to distract him. And Kai ends up channeling the other's powers to defend himself. And he gets the image of injured Peyton to appeal to his emotions. And Kai kind of lets his guard down before his anger just takes over, and he ends up trying spotting what he believes is Ace nearby. So he sends a blade flying into his chest, and he ends up finding out that it's actually Jax that's wrapped in an illusion. So he picks up his adoptive brother and runs towards the audience where he tries to find a healer to draw the power from. And then when he does end up healing him, the first trial ends up ending, which is terrible. And honestly, I know this sounds really, really, really bad, but if Jax would have died in that moment, I think it would have made the book a little bit better.
I agree. I think it made more sense for him to die. Like, more people should have died.
Yeah. I do think it would have played a little bit more on the anger to Kai and then would have made more sense why he overlooked a lot of things that Peyton was doing because he was just so like caught up in his grief. But I also think that would have heightened the disconnect between Kit and Kai a little bit more to the point where it was kind of like a little bit of like a Kit resented Kai for killing him and that kind of snowball.
Yeah. No, I agree.
So we end up finding out that Hera was also killed during the fight, and then the rest of the contestants go back and like rewatch the recordings of the events. And Peyton is really troubled by the fact that Kai and her's conversations were displayed publicly, but obviously that's clickbait. That's what's going to be shown. And she wonders how that will affect people's opinions of her whenever they cast their votes, which I'm really not quite sure what their votes are for.
I don't know. It talked about it and it
Because
never wrapped it up.
yeah, because like they basically said whoever gets the flag at the begin or the top of the mountain wins the trial. So I mean,
But then it also said on the last trial, it said that Sadie won. But we
yeah,
never talked about what the points looked like.
yeah,
Make it make sense.
yeah. I'm not quite sure. Like to me, it would have made sense if they would have like each trial, like the first two trials, were whoever gets the most armbands gets an advantage in the last game. Whoever wins the second one gets an advantage in the last
Yeah.
game as well. Like that would have made sense to me. But it really there were other than just like narrowing down the pool is all I get from the first two trials. And then the third one, I'm really not quite sure, other than the fact that he was trying to prove a point that he had Adena in the middle of the garden.
No,
So,
I agree. Again, I'll probably get more info once I read Powerful, but even putting her in the garden, Blair kills her. And then we just breeze past that.
yeah.
Like, it happens, it's sad, and then, never mind, I'm gonna kill the king. What? I don't know. It's like,
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense. It doesn't.
There's a lot of things that were kind of open ended that didn't quite get resolved. We end up getting back where Kit is trying to court Peyton again, and he takes her to the palace gardens and confesses that he enjoys being around Peyton and enjoys her honesty. He asks what her genuine opinion of the trials is, and Peyton ends up telling him that she believes celebrating the purging is immoral, and that she expresses her doubts that the ordinaries are dangerous, and her belief that killing them is cruel and unnecessary. And Kit seems to appreciate that and promises Peyton that he'll keep listening to her. They end up having a cute little banter moment, splash each other with water from the garden's fountains and everything. It was just a cute little moment. I feel like Kit and Kai were kind of polar opposites in that way. This moment with her was sweet and innocent, almost like he was not really quite sure what he was
Mm-hmm.
doing. Kai was more hardcore experienced.
It was definitely like Kit was more like playful and fun, and
Mm-hmm.
Kai was more like sensual and sexual.
Hot, cold moment.
Yes, very, very much so.
So Peyton ends up returning to the loot to try to find the resistance, which she ends up finding is meeting in her home, which I was shocked that Lenny was a part of that. That did take me off guard,
That's
but
fair.
made me like Lenny even more. And she ends up noticing a couple other people there, and they reveal that Peyton's father was actually the leader of the resistance before he was murdered, and that their plan is to infiltrate the trial or the bowl, which is where the trial is held the last day, and confront the king and demand freedom for the ordinaries and the fatals. So Lenny ends up explaining that Peyton's job will be to earn the prince's trust to find a tunnel that can help lead the resistance into the bowl undetected. So she gets back to the palace. Kai ends up getting a little jealous of Peyton and Kit laughing together. It seems like every time Kai observes Kit and Peyton, they're having like a carefree moment. And then whenever it's with Kai, it's more like serious business.
Agreed.
So I think he was a little bit more jealous of how carefree Peyton was with him.
Because
Um,
they can just be different. Like, that's what it is. Kit doesn't have the weight of the world on his shoulders. At this
exactly.
point. I think it changes obviously when he does become king, but at this point, Kit is not a murderer.
Agreed.
So, yeah.
So Peyton ends up coming over and asking him to, or challenges him to an archery competition. And Peyton actually is really good at archery, which Katniss. And she kind of, because she's so good, Kai ends up getting a little bit more competitive. And he tries to distract her, flirting with her. And he ends up driving her to make some mistakes. She ends up doing the same thing to him and ends up winning against him. Peyton starts getting closer at the same time with Kit, who is opening up to her about his feeling of being trapped in the palace. Hey, why don't we visit the slums as a way to try to get an idea of where the secret passages are?
What a poor
And
little boy that has to be trapped in the palace.
I know it's so terrible.
I'm mad.
So the prince sounds intrigued, but the king ends up interrupting them, and he warns Peyton that she will not win the trials and that she needs to stop trying to get close to the princes. Which I think at this point it also kind of implies that he's aware of who Peyton is.
You know,
I'm not quite sure why he doesn't expose that
do you know what
point.
I would have said? I would have said, you might as well tell your sons to leave me alone. Because I don't have to seek them out, baby. Keep playing. I'll take
True.
them both from you.
True. They are the ones bothering her
She
for
don't even
sure.
have to try.
I don't understand though why the king didn't just call her out if he was aware of the powers.
I think he would have
He's
exposed
smart.
himself if he did that.
Maybe, yeah. And the fact that she's been living in his house for 3, 4 weeks at this
Yeah.
point, undetected in a way. So Peyton and Kit dance at the ball, and she ends up running into Kai, who is blatantly drunk. And she drags him away to clean up some wine on his shirt. And they have like their typical flirtatious banter. But Peyton, he ends up like touching her, and Peyton asks him not to touch her while he's drunk. And she ends up getting kind of flustered and starts hyperventilating. So Kai ends up unlacing her dress to kind of relieve some of that pressure on her chest. And she's grateful for his kindness, but very irritated that he tried to basically pull a move on her.
Oh, he was helping her.
So Kai ends up going back to the party afterwards, and he kind of quizzes Kit a little bit about it, and Kit ends up revealing that he is kind of fascinated by her. But Kai just kind of pretends that it's nothing between them, no big deal.
Liar.
And then randomly at this ball, they decide they're going to have a little brawl to heighten the tension before the second trial. Yeah, super confusing. Kai and Braxton end up being paired first. Kai ends up winning that one. Andy and Ace go next, and Andy ends up winning. And finally, Blair and Peyton are pinned against each other. He gets close to Blair and ends up punching her in the face, which kind of throws Blair off. Blair ends up walking away victorious, but Peyton knows that she's made her point. However, the next trial is at a mountain, and their goal is to basically climb to the top of the mountain to work together as a team, which was kind of dumb. But they end up coming across a snake pit, and Andy is bitten by one of the snakes, and they're not quite sure if it's venomous or not. Kai ends up insisting on carrying Andy up the mountain on his back, which I do find sweet because Andy was kind to Peyton, and so he was like kind of repaying that kindness by carrying her up. But also, it's his cousin as well, so that kind of influences that, I'm sure.
Yeah, but also it's like made like such a big deal, like, oh, she's gonna die, like he can tell it's poison and she's gonna die, and then like they fight it out on the top of the mountain and nobody attacks her.
Yeah,
And then we don't know how she was healed or what happened, then all of a sudden she's in the third trial.
true. It was kind of open
It was
ended.
weird.
Well, and I do find it interesting because I do think the king actually, like, I don't know if it ever specified because I don't remember, but I think the king kind of played a part into selecting the groups that were
Mhm.
together. So I find it weird that he paired Jax with Ace and Peyton, knowing that he's watched Ace and Peyton basically try to kill each other. So I'm not quite sure what his intention was with pairing Jax
I
with
don't think he
him.
cared about Jax.
It's very well possible because he obviously didn't care about Kai either, other than the fact what Kai could do for
Yep.
him. So Ace ends up conjuring an illusion with a snake and almost falling off the mountain, but Jax ends up saving her. And Peyton gets angry when she finds out it's an illusion. And Jax ends up basically saying, hey, like, hold off until we get to the top. Like, let's just keep going. So Jax starts talking about his adopted brothers and how they took him in, that apparently his parents were advisors to the king. And he talks a little bit more about the physical and emotional torture that Kai had endured during the king's training, which gives Peyton more insight into the prince and kind of makes her feel a little bit differently about him. Um, but after they narrowly evade a rock slide, Peyton is concussed by a boulder hitting her in the side of the head, but they continue trying to make it to the top. And Kai is still also carrying Andy up the side of the mountain, but she's growing weaker because of the venom.
Yeah.
And as they get up to the top, basically all of a sudden the games change, and they're saying that only one contestant will be declared the winner of the second trial as soon as they capture the flag at the top of the peak. So obviously, bloodbath
Right.
ensues, because why wouldn't that
Yeah,
be?
what else would happen?
Yeah. So Peyton ends up attacking Ace, and he uses images of herself pleading. Peyton basically says, I'm not afraid of myself anymore. That girl, that haunted weak girl begging for help, for love, is me. Without her, I wouldn't be who I am today. I'm still haunted, maybe and still hoping for love, but I am no longer weak because of it.
Period.
And so Ace starts strangling her, and she pretends to be unconscious, and he ends up letting her go, and she pins him down and goes to try to kill him. However, she ends up meeting Kai's gaze and realizes that Ace's life is not hers to take, so gives him to Kai instead, and obviously he kills him, and he offers Peyton basically the victory in exchange for allowing him to kill Ace.
If
He
that's
lets her
not
run.
love.
I know. Basically, let me kill my enemy and you can win the trial. We end up getting to the end of the trial whenever she grabs the flag. We end up finding out that in addition to Ace, Braxton was also killed by Blair, and that the king also starts expressing his doubts about Peyton, a slummer, being able to win the trials. And he encourages his son to prove himself and do honor to his role as an enforcer, basically stop being weak.
Basically,
Um,
stop worrying about this little girl.
Pretty much. And Kai angrily responds to Kit whenever he starts asking why his dad was so harsh on him. And he was like, you don't understand the duties of an enforcer. Like, I'm made to be hard. And Kit he basically says Kit needs to think for himself and not to become his father's pawn.
Which is what we're all saying, baby.
I think you will make a great king, Kit, and I will proudly serve you. But I need you to learn to think for yourself because one day father won't be there to do it for you. So I suggest you start figuring out what you think is best for you.
Mhm.
So Peyton ends up taking Kit to the loot and he starts pointing out the thieves and what happened with the public lashings. She shows him the fort, things like that. He also, in exchange, has shown her where the tunnel is, which she does feel conflicted about betraying his trust, but end up telling the resistance that she has found the tunnel and promises to steal the key from Kit. And at the same point, Peyton that night is awoken by Kai's screams. She goes to wake him up and he pins her to the bed and puts a knife to her throat. He asks her to end up staying with him despite her conflicted feelings. She ends up laying in bed with him. The tension does end up increasing between the two, but they end up just falling asleep together. Kai does thank her for helping him. The third trial comes around, and the king has warned Kai to stay away from Peyton. The contestants are thrown into a gigantic enchanted maze. Kai and Peyton make their way to the center first, where they find Adena chained up and beaten. The king, who now knows that Peyton is an ordinary, used Adena to teach her a lesson. Adena is end up being killed by Blair while members of the resistance invade the arena. The resistors' confrontation with the kings and his imperials turn into a massacre. As Kit realizes Peyton's treason, she attempts to flee. However, she's stopped by the king, who reveals the truth about her father's murder. Kai had killed him as part of his enforcer's training. At the end of the story, Peyton kills the king and confronts Kai, who lets her run away because he's unable to kill her. Kit is later crowned king and orders Kai to find and kill Peyton, thus setting up the second book. In the morning, they're kind of awkward and not wanting to reveal their feelings to each other. She tries to keep her distance, and they end up going to a ball where she tries to avoid Kai as much as possible. She dances with Kit and ends up stealing the key, which she passes to Lenny. And she, at some point, finding herself partnered with Kai, who is trying to push her towards saying her feelings. And she ends up having a panic attack. And Kai basically pushes her outside and tells her to go ahead and go. As they're out there talking and fixing to kiss, finally, Peyton and Kai are interrupted by the king, and he's angry that basically Kai's getting too attached to her. It was such a good moment, too. And Kit if you refuses to intervene with the situation, and Kai is angry and states that he will not give up on Peyton. The last trial ends up beginning the next day, and they end up to a huge maze. The king says whoever reaches the center of the maze and kills the criminal waiting there will win the first trial, emphasizing more bloodshed. After they get in there, they basically realize that the maze is moving and changing, which reminds me of the Maze Runner. Soon afterwards, Blair finding Peyton, and Blair threatens Peyton and chokes the air out of her, and she taunts Blair about her not being able to get either of, or Peyton taunts Blair about not being able to get either of the princes, and she ends up throwing Peyton around and kicking her. So Peyton grabs her foot, knocks her down, and Blair ends up going unconscious. So she ends up running to get to the clearing. At the same time, Kai is running through the maze, and he ends up kind of having an argument with Andy, who is taken over by her animal form. And he ends up lashing on to one of the elite's powers where they can change the maze, and he ends up making it where he can run through to the center.
Which, not gonna lie, felt like cheating.
It did, and I also wasn't quite unsure how that was possible because they talk about how the bowl is covered with mute, which is like a material that's supposed to like stop everybody from being able to use their
Mhm.
powers. So I feel like that would have been something they would have used in this whole
Or
situation.
they would have,
So
like, very strictly made sure that he wasn't close enough to any of them to use their power, you know what I mean? That was shady.
agreed. Well, and speaking of shady, get to the middle and end up finding out that Adina is sitting there, beaten and tied up, and Peyton's like in shock. And basically, the king had warned her that she had not won the trial, and she realizes that he basically made sure that she could not, because obviously she can't kill Adina. And Blair ends up killing Adina in exchange, so she wins the trial.
Okay, first of all, I thought it was dumb that Blair killed her. I thought Kai should have. Not because I want Kai to actually do that, but because Kai would have won the thing and he would have done that to be proven to his dad and like betrayed her, and that would have been his betrayal. Or they got interrupted in the middle of it with the resistance and then like she dies in the middle of the battle or something. I don't know. But her hands being mangled made me so mad.
Yeah,
Are you serious? The
agree.
next scene when she kills him was very satisfying.
Well, my part about it that confused me is like they consistently talk about this vest that Adena has made her and how like she promises as she's dying that she'll wear it. Like I'm thinking there has to be something embedded into it at some
What
point.
did that make you think of?
The vest?
Mhm. Who else likes a vest because it has pockets?
I mean, obviously Violet.
Yeah, but it's not per se a book.
I mean, I like pockets.
Yelena.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
all I thought of was the green vest.
Yeah.
That's all I could picture.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. So Kai's kind of confused and he's not quite sure what Adina's doing there. And as the crowd's like cheering for Blair and everything, mass figures start coming out of the tunnels and they end up taking the royal family members hostage, which they also had promised that it would be a peaceful situation. And they end up basically threatening to kill the princes if the king refuses to reintegrate the ordinaries into society. So Kai ends up understanding, as well as Kit, that Peyton has betrayed him. And basically, Kai overcomes the silencer that's silencing his powers and steals the power to erupt in flames. But the moment that Kit looks at her is where I want to kind of quote at. So she says, he holds my gaze looking so hurt, so horrified, so full of hatred. His eyes are so cold that I nearly shiver under his stare. The boy glaring down at me is devoid of every bit of warmth, every bit of charm I've come to know. He is cold, he is callous, he is like this because of me. He is his father. So maybe her dad did the same thing to his dad. I don't know. But as the fight ends up happening, Peyton ends up saying her final goodbye to it, and she gets up to run away, and she is stopped by the Kings in some tunnels. And he basically admits he's known she's an ordinary for quite some while and a resistance member, and he tries to kill her for treason. But the King also taunts Peyton about her father and Adena's murder, which enrages her. And as he swings his sword at her, she ends up basically evading his attacks, and he eventually overpowers her. And while they fight, he admits that he lied about ordinaries carrying a disease to create an elite society and become more powerful. And he pins Peyton down and carves the O for ordinary above her heart with a dagger to brand and humiliate her. And as he's about to kill her, she gets free and overpowers him and breaks his nose. He tells her that she is misremembering the night basically of her father's death and that Kai was actually the one that killed her, which Peyton then realizes that that's why the prince felt so familiar to her this whole time.
And I called it.
Yeah,
Makes sense.
you did pretty early on.
It makes sense.
Still, it's harsh, which I guess would make his first betrayal. She just didn't know it until this point.
But can you really hold it against him?
He could have said no.
How would he have said no? He was a
He would
boy.
have. He could have said no. He just wouldn't have lived on the streets like the rest of them.
I don't think he would have lived on the streets. I think he would have been tortured until he said yes. And
It's
Peyton's dad would
possible.
have died anyways. And he didn't know it was Peyton's dad. And he ran off crying and cried himself to sleep after he did it.
True.
I thought while she was murdering the king, and she was like, "This is for my dad, and this is for me." I really thought she was going to say, "And this is for Kai," but she didn't.
It would have been a little bit better.
Yeah, but she didn't.
Well, and so at the same time, Kai is also fighting the resistance members, and he kind of gets unsettled by the lack of their supernatural abilities. And he ends up saying to an extent, like, why does it feel wrong to fight in an extraordinary way?
Which I actually agree with. It's like
Yeah,
cheating. It really is. Like, if you're so powerful and so strong, why do you have to use an advantage?
true. So As the king is dying, Peyton ends up noticing that everything was recorded by a sight who runs away. And as Peyton goes to flee, Kai ends up throwing a dagger at her, and he basically just talks about how he's conflicted with his duty to kill her and his feelings for her. And Peyton, who now knows that Kai killed her father, is ready to die at his hands as well. However, he offers her basically a head start and promises her that he will not show mercy the next time he finds her.
Okay, but question. Do you think there's more to that site recording this incident? Because Kai caught her, knows it was her dagger, like, we don't need any more proof that she actually killed the king. So I'm wondering if the site won't like come forward later on and like Kit will watch it or something and then realize what actually happened and like they'll watch her be branded and you know what I mean and open their eyes more to like what was happening. I'm not saying they'll be
I
okay with it, but like a better understanding.
I think my biggest thing is like I'm just not quite sure that A, the site will show them the full story or just like her admission. And then B, because you don't know how much like they're able to filter, whether you could just play it all the way through or
Yeah.
whatever, because it doesn't really talk about that. But I'm also wondering if like they'll end up like I don't know if it'll affect how Kit feels or not. You know what I mean? Based off what they end up choosing to show or not show.
That's fair. I guess my brain is trying to figure out how we get to betrothed.
True.
That's kind of like how I mean, I get the, keep your friends close but your enemies closer. But like he's hell bent at the end of this book on torturing her. And so how by the end of the next book we end up y'all finna get married.
Do you know what my theory is?
What's your theory?
She becomes like the Mockingjay in a sense of the resistance. And so to calm the fights, they kind of form a marriage of convenience kind of situation.
Hmm. Okay. I can see that. But then do they become the enemies to lovers?
It's possible. It's
Why can't she
possible.
just have both brothers?
Again, that would not make the whole story.
Actually, it would.
For you,
All of a sudden, like, oh, hey, duh, here's the solution.
it wouldn't work.
I disagree.
Okay. So, as he's leaning over his father's body, is conflicted. He's heartbroken, angry, shocked, and now he understands that Peyton's an ordinary, and that's his duty to murder them, basically. So, he promises himself he'll eventually find her. At the same time, she's conflicted with her feelings for Kai as she's running away and reminiscing about their tender moments, and she's dismayed now that she finds out that he was actually her father's murderer. So then we get the epilogue in Kit's point of view, and it's a couple days after the king's death. Kit has now been coordinated as a new king, and he is irrationally angry.
He really cared for his daddy.
Yeah, and I believe Peyton.
He liked her.
He tells Kai that as his now enforcer, you are to find Peyton and bring her back to me. So, what is your thoughts and ratings?
Okay, so just a little preface before I tell you my actual rating. I do not pick a number until I'm sitting right here, right now, in this moment. And it probably really doesn't mean much of anything. I'll tell you my opinion as we go through the episode, and that's what you should rely on. This is like lower than I ever thought it would be for a romantasy. Like I've said throughout this entire episode, if the banter had not been any good, I would not have finished this book probably. And that's really harsh, I know, and I really hate that. And I'm hoping that book 2 gets better and does better, and maybe book 3 will be even better. I don't know. But my rating for Powerless, let's say a 3.2.
Okay. Higher than what I thought you were going to give it.
The banter was good. I liked the banter. I liked that aspect of the story. I liked some of the characters. I thought we could have developed them more. I thought the plot could have been developed more. The fantasy, the action side of it, all of that could have been developed more. But it was still okay. Like I didn't dislike it. It was just all right, if that makes sense. So, yeah, that's mine. What's yours?
So I started at 3 and go up and down. And the first time I read this was 5 star for me. Second time now reading it, I would say it's more like a 4. I really like the flirtation and the banter. I wasn't really going into it focusing on the fantasy aspect of it or anything. So the banter to me, I liked a lot. It still made me giddy, still made me like kick my feet and giggle a little bit and stuff like that. I personally enjoyed that a little bit. It's not as high as what it was the first time I read it for sure. So that's kind of disappointing to me, but at the same time, it was still a decent read overall. I'm not really a fan of Powerful as much, and then I'm not finished reading Reckless yet. But of course, you'll have to tune into our bonus episode to get that. That
Yes.
was
So, if you liked this episode or any of our other episodes, please subscribe to get access to bloopers, extra content, and more on Patreon and Patreon only. You can also find our free episodes on the first, third, and fifth Friday, if there is one, of every month on any podcast platforms that you have access to.
Yeah, you can also send us book suggestions, comments, or general inquiries to our email at likewereadthem at Karl with a K, mpodcast.com. You can stay tuned for our upcoming newsletter as well at the beginning of this year. You can also join us on Fable, Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram for more engagement from us and the latest news. Karl, do you want to let us know what our next read is?
Yes, so actually, I think I'll have two to announce because of the way our bonus episode comes out. So, technically, our next read is Powerful by Lauren Roberts. That comes out December 3rd, but this is the bonus episode, so you have to subscribe to get access.
Only on Patreon.
And then next, of course, will be Reckless by Lauren Roberts, and that comes out on December 6th. The blurb for Powerful is Adena and Peyton have always been inseparable. Fate brought them together when they were young, but friendship ensured they would always protect each other in the home they built in the slums of Loot Alley. But now Peyton, an ordinary, has been selected for the purging trials, which means almost certain death. Now alone on Loot, Adena must fend for herself. After she attempts to steal, a mysterious man from the market comes to her rescue. Mac's shadowy past and secretive power sets him apart from the other low-level elites of Loot. And as the pair team up to see their loved ones before the trials, the quest test their loyalty, their love, and their lives. And then the blurb for Reckless is I wonder how often the enforcer kneels before anyone. You're afraid of me. Kai meets my statement with a stare, steady, but drawn out like a sigh. I'd be a fool not to fear something so fierce. I swallow. And are you not? A fool, that is. He stands then, holding my gaze until he's the one looking down on me. Not anymore. But yes, so thank you for tuning in. We can't wait to hear your thoughts on this episode or any other episodes. And don't forget to join us over on Fable, where you can discuss each chapter through each book with us as you read. And as always, we promise to call them like we read them.
Team